Subcommittee begins its review of Title IX of Water Resources Development Act of 2007, which established the National Committee on Levee Safety and charged it with developing recommendations for a national levee safety program to more adequately address risk in flood-prone areas. The National Committee on Levee Safety was challenged with coming up with recommendations within 180 days of enactment of a secondary piece of legislation clarifying the provision in the Water Resources Development Act. While this was a steep hill to climb, the committee delivered on its promise. Sadly, the Office of Management and Budget took longer to review the draft report than it took the National Committee on Levee Safety to actually write the report. Even with this review, OMB made no changes to the report. Congress asked for an unvarnished opinion and analysis from levee safety experts nationwide, while OMB at times may perform necessary functions of political analysis of a levee risk, and a safety report required by law and intended for Congress is neither warranted nor welcome. This type of meddlesome behavior by OMB and its inattention to infrastructure has left the United States vulnerable to catastrophic flooding. Recent events have been all but ignored, and catastrophic loss of life could very well happen again. Uncertainty in location, lack of oversight, lack of technical standards, and an inability to effectively communicate risk has left America in a vulnerable state. The National Inventory of Dams shows that 45% of all federal dams are at least 50 years old, and that 80% of them are at least 30 years old. We know less about the status and capabilities of our levees. There has never been a national inventory of levees. Little is known about the current condition of both federal and non-federal levees, including whether these levees were designed to meet current conditions or whether they have been properly maintained by the non-federal interest. Over the decades, levees have been built by different entities at different times and to different standards. They have been linked together to provide a protective system, but with such a mixture of conditions, the true level of protection may be in doubt. Over time, development has taken place behind some of these levees, so that today may be much more of a risk in terms of lives and economic resources than in the past. The Army Corps of Engineers has authority over more than 2,000 separate levee systems, comprising more than 14,000 miles of levee infrastructure. However, more than 100,000 miles of levees may exist nationwide. More people are moving to coastal and riverine areas where the risk is at its greatest. Because of Hurricane Katrina and Rita, the federal government is augmenting state and local recovery efforts with billions of dollars of aid to the Gulf Coast. We do not know where the next hurricane or flood will hit, but we do know that many of our major cities, including parts of Washington, D.C., have a greater probability of flooding than did New Orleans. For example, the city of Sacramento, California has almost twice as many people as New Orleans, yet it has less flood protection than any other major city in America. Cities like Houston, St. Louis, and Miami also are at risk. We cannot treat citizens of these cities differently unless we have a policy reason that we can explain and justify to our constituents. There is so much that we do not know about the levees in America that we cannot be sure how safe our cities and towns really are. The National Committee on Levee Safety did an excellent job on its report. While it had only a little time to scratch the surface on the issue of levee safety, the report has provided a great deal of education and enlightenment to the Congress and the nation. The report reminds the Congress and the nation that just because people reside behind a levee or other flood damage reduction project, they are not guaranteed safely, only that their risk of catastrophic loss has been reduced. An important reminder is how we define the 100-year flood event, that a resident has a 26% chance of a flood during the life of a 30-year mortgage. In the 1920s and 1930s, levees and flood structures were constructed to defend against the 500-year, 1,000-year flood event. In 1968, the National Flood Insurance Program established the 100-year flood designation as its risk standard. This may have had unintended consequences of encouraging the construction of flood damage reduction projects to this arbitrary and relatively low threshold. Those living behind 100-year structures are not required to purchase national flood insurance. In fact, less than 6 million people hold flood insurance policies in more than 20,000 communities nationwide. Well-designed and well-constructed projects continue to be economically justified because they reduce risk to life and property. However, new projects may also attract development that otherwise would not be there. Effective flood risk management involves multiple layers of defense and governance, a shared responsibility. Levees by themselves are not an effective solution. Raising structures, reestablishing floodplains, providing insurance, and building reservoirs are all potential ways of reducing flood risk. We cannot reduce risk over a few years. This crisis is building for generations, and it will take a combination of long-term and short-term measures to address the levee safety crisis. The American Society of Civil Engineers issued their report card on the nation's infrastructure a few weeks ago, giving levees the lowest grade of all infrastructure types. They point out that more than 85% of the levees are locally owned and maintained, and their liability is uncertain. Because we do not fully know the scope of the problem, we do not know what it's going to cost to fix it. However, a rough estimate by ASCE is that it may cost more than $100 billion to repair and rehabilitate the nation's levees. The nation has recently been forced to face the fact that some banks and some businesses are just too big to fail. Well, I would submit to you that the potential risk posed by unsafe levees is a risk too big to ignore. We must begin to get an understanding of the scope of the problem and begin to discuss strategies to reduce flood risk in America. I would like to thank the National Committee on Levee Safety for providing to Congress a reasoned and thoughtful approach to initiating our efforts on National Levee Safety Program. While we may not agree on all of the finer points of their recommendations, I want to congratulate the members of the National Committee on Levee Safety for meeting the challenge of producing an enlightening report. Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson, for holding this hearing. I look forward to the testimony of the witnesses.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boozman.